Hello everyone, welcome to the first of potentially many fight recap videos for Copperhead. In these videos I want to do something very similar to what I do with my lower weight class robots, is give you some context going into the fight, some of the strategy that we were trying to use, and then some kind of recap afterwards. So that is the goal for this. This video is going to be for Skorpios versus Copperhead, and this was our first showing and the first episode that we were in. If you have not seen this episode, please watch the episode first and then come back to this video. This is going to give everything away and then you won't want to or need to watch that fight. So please be sure to watch that episode first and then come back and watch this. So let's get started on the in-depth analysis for Copperhead versus Skorpios. The first thing I want to mention before we start going into the analysis of this fight is I do not actually have Copperhead in front of me, or either of the Copperheads in front of me, because there are two different robots. And the reason for that is, one, I just don't physically have it in front of me, but I also don't want to give any spoilers away for any upcoming fights or episodes. There are some different paint colors on it, and I just really don't want the internet going crazy with, oh, who's that and who's that? I don't want to risk anyone finding out about any of our upcoming matches or looking at, little nuanced pieces of damage that we didn't think about. So the bot will not be in this episode, but I will use pictures as much as I can to illustrate my points. So that being said, let's talk about just kind of the lead up to the fight. The first week that you show up at BattleBots, you do a lot of media stuff, like a lot of the intro videos, a lot of the interviews, and just kind of getting set up and passing through safety and getting registered and taking headshots and all that stuff. That all happens kind of that first week that you're at BattleBots. And they don't really announce the fights until later towards the end of the week. I'd have to go back and look at the schedule, but the fights started towards the end of the week. We got there like Monday, Tuesday, I want to say, and the fights happened, kind of later on in that week. And they announced it maybe just a day or so in advance. And we were not in one of the first sessions, we were in one of the later sessions, and we were just kind of, waiting for our name to be heard, and finally we heard it was going to be Copperhead versus Skorpios, and we were generally pretty happy about this. And I mean, no disrespect to Skorpios whatsoever. I'm just saying it wasn't Bite Force, it wasn't Tombstone, it wasn't Endgame. There's a lot of really nasty bots that you don't necessarily want to have that as your first fight. Now, that is not to say that Skorpios isn't scary. They are a scary bot. They're a very good driving bot. They're a very good control bot. And, they've gone against Icewave. They're a good bot. There's nothing against them, but it is a different type of fight than going against a Tombstone or a Bite Force. It's less of, we got to cross our fingers and not, just get completely obliterated. And it's more of a, we're going to lose based on strategy. So, pretty different. They also had a few different upgrades this year. I have some pictures of all of this. In addition to the normal overhead saw, they also had this overhead weapon, which thankfully, they planned to use against us. One of the reasons that they planned on using this overhead saw was because our top panel was, I forgot if it's 3/8 or 1/4 inch Hardox or AR 500, and so you're not really going to saw through that. There really wasn't much that they could get to, and also if that saw were to just nick our drum when it was running, that was going to be all over for the saw. So very good point, very good idea for them to not use the saw and use the overhead weapon instead. The next thing I'd like to address is the drum itself. As some of you were watching this episode, you might have had this question: what is that little stuff on the back or the underside of the drum? Well, fun story. So this was maybe about a week before we were leaving for BattleBots. We were getting the drum ready, we were getting everything kind of finalized, and when we were doing some weapon testing with the drum, we noticed that it was out of balance. I made a little rig, made a little jig, put on there. You'd kind of like let go of the drum and the tooth would just fall down. It was supposed to be a little bit more weighted towards the tooth, so that as the tooth wears down, it kind of evens out, something like that, but it was way out of balance, and we couldn't use it as is, so we needed to adjust some of the balance. And so what we ended up doing is welding some extra material on the back side of the drum away from the tooth to try and balance that out. Well, unfortunately, because this was hardened S7, we didn't follow the right procedure. You should be preheating this material before you do the welding. We didn't do that. We were in a rush. We forgot. And when we put that on there, it created a thermal differential at the location where the weld was going on, and that thermal differential created a thermal shock, and it started to actually crack the backside of the drum. And I have some pictures of the drum here to show you. You can see that we just had all these hairline cracks in there. And when you put your ear down to the drum, you could hear like these Rice Krispie sounds. You could just hear all these cracks just spreading. So what we did is we immediately took the drum, put it in the oven, got it up to temperature to kind of stop that thermal stress and stop those cracks from propagating out. Once that was kind of stabilized, we brought it back out of the oven, ground out all of the cracks, pretty deep actually. I think we went maybe like a ½ inch deep, something like that. My battery is done charging, that's pretty cool. Went about a ½ inch deep inside there to get rid of the cracks, then filled the whole thing up with weld while preheating the whole time. So that's why the back looks like that. Both drums were actually out of balance. We have two separate drums, and on this drum we did it this way, filled in that crack, and it actually turned out to be pretty well balanced. On the other drum, we ended up just shaving down the tooth instead of messing with adding material. So that is why this drum looks like it. And fun fact, when you're watching all the videos this season, you can actually tell which drum and which bot we're running, because one of them had the Frankenstein drum and the other had the nice, clean, pretty drum. So a little fun fact. So strategy. There really isn't a lot of strategy with a control bot other than keep the drum pointed towards them. We heard from a lot of the other builders and a lot of the other competitors up until this point, because we weren't one of the first ones, that the floor in the arena was just garbage, and it really was garbage. If you watch the rest of this episode, you can see almost everyone is having some issues with traction, and that was just unfortunately something that happened this season, and you're just going to have to deal with it. But the floor really wasn't that good. We kind of have a weird design to where we have the big wheels in the back and we ride on those forks. So, you know, we were definitely going to have some traction issues. We knew that going into the fight, not a big deal. With Skorpios, they were going to have a lot of the same issues. They did have that nice big plow in front. However, if we ride up the plow, we're going to hit all their tasty bits in the middle. And if we don't ride up the plow, then we hit the plow. So there really wasn't too big of a concern. They also have exposed wheels. If the weapon came down and hit the top armor, it's not that big of a deal. And if it hit the drum, that's pretty cool. So really the only thing that we were really concerned about was, one, getting upside down, and two, coming down and hitting their weapon on the top of our top armor plate. Now we do have that, you know, 1/4 inch plate of AR on top, so we weren't too concerned about that. But what we did do is go out to McMaster Carr and get a piece of UHMW, and we sandwiched it in between the top armor and the body of the robot. The idea was that when the overhead weapon comes down and hits, it would still hit the metal, but there'd be a little bit of a shock absorption with the UHMW underneath. We could have flipped that to have the UHMW on top, but we were really worried about cranking down the screws. All of these screws are kind of, you know, torqued down into place, and you can't really torque down into UHMW that much because it's a, you know, slippery plastic. So you keep tightening it and it just kind of swells and gives way. And so we're really worried about all of those screws becoming loose and then maybe the top panel coming off or something like that. So we end up going with the UHMW sandwiched in between the two metal layers. So regarding the actual fight with Skorpios, we had a few issues going into the fight that we kind of knew about, but they definitely became more apparent as we started the fight. The first off was the weapon spin-up. Many of you that follow my channel have seen, you know, the weapon spin-ups here of Copperhead in my garage and stuff like that. And we did do okay with weapon spin-up, but there was still an issue with it kind of instantly grabbing in the beginning. And we didn't get that fully worked out before the Skorpios fight. It was weird. It was like 4 out of 5 times you would hit the throttle and it would just catch and everything was fine. But in one of those 5 times, it just would stall out and it wouldn't actually get going. And one of those 5 times was in the BattleBots arena. You just, get a little nervous, whatever, and you hit the throttle and it doesn't do what you want it to do. So that was something that we needed to work on for the next fights, but that's why the weapon just wasn't starting up. The weapon system was fine. It's just that we made some last-minute tweaks, and those tweaks didn't end up doing what we wanted them to do. I'm not going to go into a ton of details on tuning the ESC because, quite frankly, the information that I would give you here would not be useful for you. We're still not 100% sure what all was going on in that fight. But suffice it to say, the weapon just wasn't spinning up the way that we wanted to. So that was one of the issues. Another issue that we found after the fact was the drive system. So we actually had 2 separate drive issues which were completely unrelated, and we found out about later. This table, there we go. One of the drive issues was on the main drive sprocket on the wheel. We have this system to where we have a main drive sprocket and the needle bearing runs through it, and the wheel just kind of spins around a dead shaft that is bolted or welded into the frame. That sprocket is then screwed into the central hub on the wheel, and that's what holds these 2 things together. I probably have a picture showing you right now of that assembly. The issue was we didn't use Loctite on those screws going into the wheel hub. So what happened is, I think that one first big hit where we hit against the screws, I think some of those screws ended up kind of working their way out. And behind that sprocket, or on the other side of the sprocket, those screw heads kind of go into the frame. There's a couple little cutouts of the frame, and they just worked their way out, got caught up in the frame, and that locked up one drive side. So if you see us kind of doing the crab walk thing halfway through, that was what happened with that side. Now, towards the end of the match, I think it was like 3/4 or so the way through, you see them come down, it hits the side of our wheel and then just kind of slides a little bit to the side and then hits the chain. And if you watch the episode again, watch the recap after the interviews and everything. They have the slow motion interviews or the slow motion replay at the end. You can definitely see that weapon come down, slide off the wheel, and go right into the groove of the sprocket and just break the chain. Now, everyone on the internet is going to be like, and that's why you don't have exposed wheels, and that's why you don't have exposed chains. Great. Go build a robot. Build a robot, make everything protected, have fun. You can't protect every single little thing. Now, one, those are big chains. We're kind of surprised that it just exploded the way it did. That happens. Secondly, that was a 1 in a million hit. Their weapon, we actually measured, is wider than the channel that you would need to hit to perfectly get to that chain. So it was just a perfect hit where they glanced off the wheel and got right to the chain. It happens. These are the things that happen during combat. So once the one chain was dead and then the other drive side was locked up, we were completely immobile at that point. That is when they pushed us from the back, hit that top panel. I'm not really sure the physics that happened there. I think what happened is the hit compressed the wheels, and when it bounced up, maybe the motion of the drum flipped it, who knows? There's some weird physics going on, but that basically popped us upside down. We had 2 dead wheels, we couldn't drive. Fun fact though, there's a lot of fun facts in this video. We can actually drive upside down, and we can very easily self-right, as I am demonstrating in this video right here. So we really have no issue with self-righting, it's just that both drive sides were dead. I think the last comment that I have specific to this fight was that top panel that we had. As I said earlier, we had the sandwich of UHMW, top panel UHMW, and then the rest of the body, and that hit was actually very surprising. 1, I wish I had taken pictures of it, and 2, I wish I had saved the original top panel. We had multiple top panels and we needed that one, so we ended up bending it back. But that panel was like a V. I mean, where that hit was, it was so much of a V that we actually had some issues getting out the screws and it wouldn't work anymore. It just kind of rocked on top of the robot. And Casey and I spent, I don't know, maybe like 2 hours on a 20-ton hydraulic press, pressing that back in, hammering it, and trying to get it less pringly to where it would be flat enough to use again. And you know, I could show you the panel right now, and it's relatively flat with just kind of a dent in the middle. It's not how it was, so showing you the panel really doesn't do that much justice. But that one little hit from Skorpios at the end really bent in that whole panel, and so much so that the bottom side of the UHMW was completely imprinted with pretty much everything on the top of the robot. There's a lot of good little bits on the inside of that, and that pushed that UHMW panel down enough to where, I mean, you can practically read lettering and read writing on it. I mean, it just really compressed it down. So that was, you know, it looked like a really small hit, and it didn't do any permanent damage to us, and it didn't break anything, but that one little hit that just bumped us upside down was actually pretty big and really dented in that panel. So go Skorpios, they hit pretty hard. Of course, we wanted a win out of our very first fight, but we did learn a lot from this fight versus Skorpios. We learned that we needed to Loctite everything. We needed to go through the bot, strip it down, figure out where all the screws were and if they were Loctite or not. So that was kind of a big learning experience. Also, we wanted to go back into the test box and change the timing and change the setting on the weapon drum. We needed to get that figured out because, you know, not having it spinning for the first 5 seconds was not a good idea. And also we needed to kind of mess with the drive a little bit just to make sure that the drive was working the way that we wanted. So, you know, first fights are always difficult and you learn a lot very quickly. We learned a lot from the Skorpios fight, but we knew that the weapon could handle the impact, and that was really the biggest concern. Going into this fight, a lot of us thought that the weapon was just going to explode on the first impact and we'd be down to one drum, and there's just no way that we could really go through the whole competition with one drum. So that was a lot of learning that we had to go through, so that was good. So in our next fight, we fight, just kidding, you're not gonna get any of that information. I'm not gonna give away any spoilers, so you'll just have to tune in to Discovery or Science Channel and see who our next fight was up against. I will be doing these for all 200 of the fights that we had this season, so be sure to tune in and also check out the rest of the content on my channel. Thanks for watching, see you then.